Voters in Austin overwhelmingly approved expanding police oversight.
Lately, there's been a push for more transparency and accountability for local police departments.
Now plan to release video footage within 10 days of when the incident happened.
Especially in cases where officers use force.
But we will be taking all cases of police misconduct to the grand jury so that our community can decide.
But that same scrutiny isn't so apparent for federal agents. The FBI, ATF, DEA, and U.S. Marshals, or even local officers serving on federal task forces.
Our NBC News partners discovered feds shot more than 220 people in a recent 5-year period nationwide. As KXAN investigator Avery Travis learned, Texas had the most cases with 17.
Yes, and rarely are they prosecuted. In fact, we had to go back a decade to look at one of the few cases that went to court right here in Austin. The prosecutor tells us he believes he might have won if it wasn't for federal law protecting these officers. On a hot July day in 2013, Austin Police Detective Charles Kleinert arrived at Benchmark Bank to investigate an earlier robbery. Security cameras captured the moment Larry Jackson Jr. tried to enter the bank, giving a false name. A confrontation between the two men turned into a chase.
The chase ended near Shoal Creek with Jackson shot dead.
The tension on this scene was different.
Ken Irvin got the case as a new prosecutor in the Travis County District Attorney's Office.
There very well could have been a crime.
A grand jury indicted the detective.
Justice now sits with the DA and prosecutors who will put together a manslaughter case against Kleinert.
Then out of nowhere we got a filing from the defense team to try to remove the case to federal court. And I got a call from the elected district attorney asking, can they do this? And I said, no. Came to find out I was wrong.
Kleinert's defense attorney, Randy Levitt, argued his client was protected as a member of an FBI task force.
When you charge a federal officer with a federal crime while they're carrying out their federal duties, they have a defense to being prosecuted if they're acting, doing what they need to do that's necessary and proper.
Part of the Constitution, called the Supremacy Clause, says federal law trumps conflicting state law. The U.S. Supreme Court has interpreted the clause to mean states shouldn't interfere with federal police work, effectively creating immunity from local prosecution.
It did seem much more like an uphill battle. He's in this legal no man's land where there are some acts that seemingly he can't be prosecuted for.
An NBC News review found only a handful of local prosecutors across the country over the last 3 decades have tried to convict federal agents after deadly shootings. None have succeeded. Often, the cases are moved to federal court, where they're likely to be dismissed.
I had not really dealt with this in the past. Very few judges have ever dealt with it. We treat it like we would every other case, and that is determine what the facts are and determine what the law is.
Lee Yackel, the judge in Kleinert's case, ultimately found no evidence the detective acted with any other motive than doing his federal duty. Prosecutors appealed the case all the way up to the Supreme Court, which declined to hear the case.
Is there enough accountability within the judicial system or otherwise for federal officers when they use deadly force?
The third branch of government, the judicial branch, is the least political branch of government. And where the fences come, whether there's enough protection or not enough protection, is pretty much up to the policymakers, the legislative branch and the executive branch, the Congress and the president.
KXAN investigators reached out to the office of every member of Texas congressional delegation sitting on the House or Senate Judiciary Committees, which oversee the Department of Justice and its federal law enforcement agencies. Senator Ted Cruz responded in part, "I have been proud to defend our law enforcement branches and the men and women who belong to them, and I will never cease to support and honor their life of service to the American people." In response to NBC's questions, a DOJ spokesperson said it recognizes the importance of transparency and accountability, which is why it recently updated its use of force policy to, quote, ensure it parallels the best practices of federal, state, and local law enforcement.
I think what's important to them is doing their job, and they do it the best way they know how, and they do it the way they've been trained to do it.
10 years later, Levitt shares an office and even cases with Irvin. who's no longer a prosecutor. He's made headlines lately defending local officers against criminal indictments.
Justice for Larry Jackson!
When looking back on this historic case, he remembers telling the family of the man who died.
It's a difficult conversation to say, I'm sorry, but this is the state of the law and this is all that we can do.
It's important to note only 2 incidents across the country over the last 5 years resulted in criminal charges against on-duty federal agents or task force officers. That's according to NBC's database. In the vast majority of cases in the database, prosecutors, grand juries, or even law enforcement agencies deemed those shootings justified, similar to what the judge ruled in the Kleiner case. For example, in one case out of Central Texas, a shootout in San Marcos in 2020, the Hays County District Attorney took the case to a grand jury, which ultimately made the decision not to indict that task force officer that was involved.
Avery, thanks very much for that. And we did dig into some of the other Texas cases, and you can check that out now in this report, plus a link to the NBC investigation that started our team's own digging, now in this story at KXAN.com.